So, Julie, let's say that you believe your child is eligible for special education and related services, and perhaps you're having a conversation of perhaps many conversations with your school district about whether or not your child is eligible for special education services. And the response you get at either an IEP, Individualized Education Program team meeting, or outside of that meeting as you're asking for help is, but your child's grades are too good for special education services.
I
Do you
hear that quite often.
Yeah.
And so what do you do?
It's sort of the twin sister of the your child's too smart for special education
Right.
services, which parallel each other a lot.
They run right by each other.
They do.
Absolutely.
So here's what the law says about that, okay?
Yeah.
So there have been a number of cases that interpret the federal statute, the IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, to ascertain whether or not a student who has good grades is eligible for services.
Right.
It seems like a logical question if you don't dig very deeply.
Right.
Because, if a student's getting good grades in school, well, presumably they're a good student. Why do you think they need special education services?
Right.
I mean, on that very basic level, it's a logical question.
Absolutely.
But what the courts have said over time is that good grades in general are subjective, all right? So grades are rarely based on some outside criteria that you've met. They're based on what the teacher usually thinks of your performance in school.
Right.
And especially in early elementary years, often that can be the teacher really likes the kid, thinks he's trying, it's a nurturing environment, and so
Right.
grades don't necessarily tell you much about what a kid is learning per se.
Right.
And what the courts have said is while an indicator, while one factor for a court to consider as to whether or not a child is making progress in school, they are not the only indicator.
Right.
And you cannot rely either for identification, meaning the decision about whether a child is eligible for services, or on the decision about whether the services the child is getting are appropriate. You can't just rely on grades.
Right.
And so that's what the law says about it. So I know that that's not the law.
Right.
So what does a parent say
Well-
when someone says that to them?
Well, practically, one of the things that you can say is I realize that my child is getting very decent grades, but I think there are some other issues that are impacting him educationally. What are some others, Jen?
Right. Well, some other responses, because sometimes when a parent says, well, I'm not so sure that these grades really reflect what he's doing, I look at his work and I compare it to, his siblings or other children that are in the class, and it doesn't look to me like it's A work, or it doesn't
Right.
look to me like it's B plus work. And you do need to be cautious, because sometimes the school is technically accommodating the child, like not penalizing them for spelling
Right.
errors, not penalizing them for being a little
Right.
late, giving them another shot at it without that being documented anywhere. So the grade really is a watered down grade. It's not even based on truly what the other kids in the class are doing.
Right.
And so the parent might say, I really don't necessarily know that these are reflective of his skills. I don't really think this shows grade level work for his grade,
His ability,
and his
right.
ability. And sometimes the team will then respond with, well, but we're trying, it's an ego boost. We're trying to improve his self-esteem by giving higher grades. And what I would just say, and I've heard the response I give to this when I hear that is, we're all thrilled about any efforts to improve our child's self-esteem. Of course, we want him to feel good about himself, but I don't think he's going to feel good about himself if he thinks he's a great student and ultimately starts to see that he can't do the same things that the rest of the kids in the class can do. Right. So, there's that delicate balance of improving a kid's self-esteem, but not doing so at the sake of actual skill.
Well, and the bottom line is that just because you are receiving certain grades doesn't necessarily mean there's a direct correlation to whether or not you can that you're learning, or that you may not benefit from special education, and that you need some specialized instruction.
Right. I mean, this goes back to what we say all the time, Julie. Education is more than just academics. So a child may actually be a straight A student, but if they cannot have a conversation with a kid in the cafeteria because their social skills are so deficient that they literally cannot have a conversation with another kid, that's part of education. So the grades have nothing to do with that.